Hey, today I'm going to talk about a project I'm working on. I'm calling it a library. This project is pretty much going to be a virtual library where I can create a book and add it to a list of books. Um, there's a few things I want to be able to do with this project. I want to be able, as mentioned, create a new book with a title, give it authors, give it a publication year, and add it to my collection. I want to be able to retrieve a list of all my books, and I want to be able to filter it by the title or authors or the published year as well. I want to be able to look up each book by an ID. I want to be able to remove books using the ID from my collection. And I also want to be able to edit existing books. So the first place I start off with when doing a project like this, structure is important. I like to flesh out the controller first. So looking right here, make sure you annotate your controller with a REST controller. And we're going to import a service class as well, and make sure to auto-wire that. So the controller is pretty much what connects the users inputting a URL to come into our backend and get information out there. So starting off, get mapping is used to read data. So we have a get mapping for get book by ID, get all the books, or getting all the books by title, author, or year. Post mapping, that's used to create new data. In this case, we're going to be using to create a new book. Delete mapping is to delete. In this case, self-explanatory, we're going to be using it to delete books from a collection. And put mapping is used for making edits on already existing data. So we're going to be using that one to edit our existing books. So once we have all of our controllers and our URLs fleshed out, we're then going to work on the service layer. So the service layer pretty much is the same thing as what was mentioned in the controller. You know, it's going to get book by ID, get all the books, etc., etc. But it's also going to check for any invalid inputs as well, or null inputs. So for example, if the user puts in a null value for the ID, it's going to throw an exception back at them. And it does these exceptions for a variety of things, such as a null title, a null author, null year, or if the user is trying to create a new book, it's going to check that the information is valid, that the same information isn't null, there isn't an empty string for the title, making sure there's not an empty string for authors, making sure the publication year is within a reasonable time period, so on and so forth. And once it does all those checks, then it'll make a call to the DAO, and the DAO will finish doing the same method. So let's take a look at the interface for the library DAO. It's pretty much stubbing out all of the methods that we have just mentioned. And in the library in mem, DAO is going to implement that interface. So we're storing all our data right now within the memory. We're not using a database right now. So we're going to override all the methods that were in an interface. We're going to do what the method implies. And there might be some exceptions thrown out here as well, such as the user gave a valid ID, but there just wasn't a book that existed with that ID. That's going to be the primary, the only main exception thrown here in the DAO. Everything else is checked in the service layer. So once you have everything fleshed out, you also want to write tests. So we have tests for the library and memdao, and we have tests for the service layer. So each one is going to test the corresponding methods within it. It's going to test the golden path, if everything went right, you know, what it should expect. And it's going to test the exceptions that we're throwing. In the event that the user puts in null or invalid input, we want to be able to catch it and give an appropriate response. And once you've written all your tests, you can just go ahead and run it. And you can tell on the bottom left here, as it processes, the first thing it's going to do is run all the tests. And assuming that all the tests are green and passing, then it'll launch your application to the web or to the local host. In this case, we're not using any web services. So all the tests are passing. Seems like uh, everything I wanted to check for is working. The golden path test and the acceptance tone. Thank you for watching this video.